Let's look at a couple who want to retire at age 60 and spend £60,000 after tax. How might they manage their tax affairs, and how much money do they need to retire with confidence? £60,000 might sound like a lot of money for a couple in retirement. It comes from the PLSA, Retirement Living Standards, where they reckon you're going to need 59,000 outside of London, 61,200 in London for a comfortable level of expenditure in retirement. And remember, these people have no mortgage, and ideally they're looking to save thousands of pounds a year by not having a financial advisor. In this example, the retirement objectives are more likely going to be around running down assets so that they are below the inheritance tax threshold in later life, and also avoiding paying 40% income tax as they spend their pension. It's important for the couple to have goals in retirement and then to build a budget of expenditure that reflects those goals. And the budget should ideally be bottom up, because if they overestimate their expenditure, then they're going to need to carry on working for too long. They're going to build up too big a pot of money than they actually need, and time that they could have spent just enjoying themselves, they end up spending in an office working. 4% rule would assume that the couple need 25 times their desired expenditure in order to finance their retirement, with only a 5% chance of running out of money. And that would imply assets of £1.5 million. But that rule does ignore the 2 lots of state pension that the couple will have. So it should be possible to retire on less money than that. Once defined contribution pensions become subject to inheritance tax from April 2027, people will be more likely and happier to die with zero, meaning that they're more likely to want to enjoy life and run down their assets rather than conserve wealth just in case they need it, because they are so opposed to inheritance tax. In this example, we've got a couple, both age 60. They've got £1 million between them in their pension, 200,000 in an ISA. 4% rule says they can retire on 48,000. When we come to the model, I've got it set up initially 60,000 till they're 75, then stepping down to 54,000 in today's money when they're 75, 42,000 when they're 85, and they're prioritizing taking from their pension first, so they've got ISA left when they are in their later years. And the first thing that we notice is that the B in this example, she runs out of her defined contribution pension before her state pension kicks in. So she needs slightly more than 100,000 using a 5% stock market return in order to fully utilise her personal allowance whilst she is retired. For Ant, with the 900,000, he's got enough money, and we can see that at today's prices they've got £233,000 when they are 95. And then what we also notice is that when Ant's tax-free cash runs out, he then becomes a 40% taxpayer because he can't get enough money from his pension at the 20% band. So what he can do is he can just flick a switch and avoid 40% income tax. Now these numbers have disappeared, and the wealth here has actually gone up by about £4,000. And then what we also notice is that when we come to analyse their wealth, we also add in the house value, they're actually going to be over the inheritance tax threshold by quite a bit, actually. So what they're probably going to need to do is downsize the house, maybe when they're 85, 90, something like that. And that can then be used to either fund care home costs. They could buy an annuity with the money so that they de-risk later life, or they can just generally gift the money maybe and just do things to avoid paying that inheritance tax. This is the tax profile of the couple. We've got the income tax for Ant, and he's pretty much on the maximum of the 20% band, and then for both of them it just drops down a bit here where their expenditure declines, pops up here when the tax-free cash runs out on the pension, drops down again when expenditure declines, and then drops down eventually to pretty much zero when they're just living off ISAs and there's a tiny amount of tax to pay on the state pension. So overall, it's a fairly robust plan. We've used assumptions of 5% stock market returns, 3% inflation, state pension of nearly £12,000 that is indexed with inflation over time, and tax-free cash at the 268,275 that does not increase with inflation. Now we can rerun the numbers again. B's got more money in her defined contribution pension, and there's a bit more money in the ISA, and overall they've got £1,050,000. And when we come to the model with the same levels of expenditure, they've just about got some money left at the age of 95. But don't forget, we haven't downsized their house. So again, when we look at the profile of their wealth by type, it's still fairly healthy. And then again, looking at the tax paid, this time they're living off the ISA much longer. So in total terms, they're paying less tax. So depending on the makeup of your investments, it can alter the amount that you need in order to live off initially £60,000 a year after tax in the first few years of retirement. And now if we use pension assets only, totaling 1.2 million with the split 1.1 million and 100,000, when we come to our model, we are again potentially running out of defined contribution pensions. We have a lot lower wealth at 95, and then as that wealth is only pension, we have to tax it at 20% to imply what the net amount available to this couple would be. They also are unable to avoid paying 40% tax in their late 70s, early 80s, so they could either just swallow that or they could change their expenditure profile so that they avoid paying 40% tax. But overall, the plan still works, and it's less money than the 1.5 million implied by the 4% rule. We use a spreadsheet for analysis because it's fully customizable, the calculations are fully transparent, and once you have it, you own it forever. Having a wealth plan can help you retire with confidence, and it can also save you a lot of money in income tax if you use the correct drawdown strategy. My retirement calculator spreadsheet is available as a standalone basis or also with coaching from me as to how to get the most out of it. I'll leave a link in the description.